My name is Garry Decker, W9WHF. I'd like to welcome you to Southwest Florida. We're located for a few weeks just off the Gulf Coast. And this morning we'll be covering my portable operation at that location. We're in Bonita Springs, Florida. And I would like to thank Ed for giving me this opportunity this morning. And particularly, I'd like to thank Cliff Batson for doing an enormous amount of work to make this presentation its very best. Thank you, Cliff. This morning, we'll be discussing my location, the challenges of a longer-term vacation deployment, the antennas that we're using, the feedline entrances that do represent a challenge, the two operating positions and the rigs therein, my rather unusual tree branch looping tactic, which I hope you'll find both amusing and somewhat informative, a little discussion on fuse corrosion and repair. There's a high concentration of salt in the air, and there is very evident salt on almost anything down here: buildings, trees, sidewalks, any metal structures. So those factor in to the life of conductors and fuses. And then at the end, we'll welcome any questions or comments you might have. We're located in Bonita Springs, Florida. As you can see, we're 2/3 down the peninsula on the Gulf side, pretty near the Gulf of Mexico, well within walking distance. Here's a little zoom in of our location. Shows how close we are to the Gulf of Mexico as well as surrounding bodies of water. And then there's canals almost everywhere. So the poor road builders in this area must have had quite a challenge. Here's an aerial view of the property. The thing I'd like you to notice is there's one large tree in the front of the property. That is a palm tree. Then we have the residence roof, the lanai, which is a screened enclosure that keeps all the bugs and critters out of the pool area. We have bunnies, we have all sorts of creatures, including iguanas, and it would be a real challenge not to have a lanai. The bad news is those have to be skirted over the top in order to get the antennas high enough that we're not laying wire antennas on top of metal structures. Across the building itself, there is a metal closure over the roof, and of course the lanai is all metal structure, including metal screens. The challenges of a vacation deployment can be rather daunting. First, there's no indication ahead of time on what structures might be available to mount antennas to. You really have no idea until you get there. And sometimes it takes a good deal of creativity to get antennas up. I have found that verticals don't work well in this environment, and therefore they're generally wire antennas give the best performance. And you have to be prepared ahead of time for whatever's going to be required for deployment. In just a minute, you'll see that I've used extendable poles in sometimes rather unique arrangements in order to get my wire antennas up. You must keep in mind that when you leave, you have, in our case, a $500 deposit, as well as the goodwill of the landlord, and you want to leave the place just the way you found it or better. In my case, I volunteered to fix anything in the house that might have gone wrong, and there have been plenty that's gone wrong, all the way from repairing toilets to faucets and dishwashers and all sorts of things. So we've had the goodwill of the landlord, to say the least. Getting permission sometimes is one of those things. Don't ask permission. Don't ask, don't tell. I certainly subscribe to that mindset, but in our case, the tree out in front of the property was so obvious that because we were using fairly wide straps around the tree in front, that when he drove by, he called and said, what's going on? And I had to kind of confess up. But in general, I suspect that you wouldn't need to ask for permission unless you kind of carried it to the length that I did. Antennas. We have two HF antennas. By experimenting over a 20-year period during vacation times, I have found that verticals just do not work well for me. End-fed antennas are the most easily deployable and efficient systems that I've found. In my case, I have one antenna is made by my antennas company, which is in Florida, curiously. That's 80 through 10 meters on HF. The sister antenna is a 40 through 10 meter my antennas offering. They both work really, really well, even in these not very good band conditions. You can make a few contacts anytime you set up, and during contest, it's just a field day because everybody wants to work a portable station. The other antennas, there are two VHF UHF antennas. One is a Diamond X50, which is a classic, wonderful antenna. It's about 3.5 dB gain on VHF and well over 5 dB gain on UHF. The second antenna is actually a mobile antenna, a Larsen NLA 270. I found a ground plane spider that will screw on to the SO239 connector that came with the Larsen pole mounting kit that I bought. It turns the mobile antenna into a really nice little ground plane antenna. You'll see all four of these antennas in pictures coming up quite soon. They've worked out well, and I will probably do the same thing next year. This is a picture of the My Antennas 80 through 10 meter toroid. It's connected by a nylon rope to an MFJ telescoping fiberglass pole, which has a baling connector at the very top. The reason that that section of fiberglass pole is not extended is I found it was incapable of supporting the weight without bending rather noticeably, so I left it at its retracted position. Immediately below is the next larger section of antenna, and so on down to the ground. The total height is around 20 feet extended, and it is held in place by the same nylon rope that is supporting the toroid, except that that rope is wound around the palm tree in a manner which keeps it tight to the palm tree. It doesn't look like it's very tight in that picture, but it's probably only a foot away. And that tactic has turned out to be quite successful in keeping the pole in place all the way down to the ground and not letting it slide from side to side while it's up. We've had no issues at all with the thing changing position as you see it in this picture. This is a picture of the 40 through 10 meter antenna. You'll notice the two aluminum window washer poles that are extended. The one at the rear is about 15 to 16 feet off the ground. The one in front is at its full 20-foot height. You would wonder why two are that close together. It turned out that there was quite a bit of sag in the wire, and I needed to put a second one in place. Very conveniently, the landlord provided a pole that's supposed to have a clothesline connected to it, which turned out to be almost an ideal location to put that pole that's nearest us in the picture. The rear one is connected to a fence that's behind the property, and again, we've used heavy-duty tie wraps to keep that one in place. Turns out that it works pretty nicely to have one up at about 6 feet and one near the ground, and the pole will wiggle back and forth in the air a little bit, but not to the degree that it causes any problems with the antenna. The wires are looped through the couplings that you'll see in just a moment, and then twisted about 15 degrees, which has managed to keep them in place during pretty decent winds that we've had recently. Cliff reminded me that in the picture, it appears that the furthest away extension pole is directly in contact with the black horizontal cables. Those cables are communication cables, but because this picture was taken with a telephoto lens camera, the appearance of that pole contacting those black horizontal wires is deceiving. It is about 5 feet away. Fortunately, the fence was enough forward that I mounted that pole to that it did not allow the aluminum extension pole to come in contact with those wires. This is a picture of the X50 diamond antenna. I've used it for about 12 years. The only time it's used is down in Florida. And again, the curiosity is that there has been some corrosions, particularly of the ground plane radials. Each year I've got to clean them up. The fittings on the antenna have to be cleaned up with CRC cleaner spray because the salt just is merciless to any kind of metal fittings. The same is true of the aluminum extension poles. When I retract them, a ring of salt forms around the plastic fitting that receives the aluminum pole itself. And then in the spring, before I'm ready to head down this way, I have to clean them up again because the salt actually works its way into the aluminum and then blooms during the summer months at home. This is a picture of the Larsen NLA 2/70 ground plane antenna. It's actually a mobile, and you can see the little spider radials that I purchased separately on eBay, and then the pole mount kit that came from Larsen with this antenna. The same window washer pole is being used in this instance, and it's about 18 feet above ground, and it really works surprisingly well. We can get into about 25 repeaters in the area that I'll speak about in a minute. Routing the cables can really provide a challenge when you don't own the home and you want to leave the facility just the way you found it. In this case, for the QRP stations, I looped both of the coaxes, one for the 4010 antenna and one for the Larsen VHF-UHF antennas, through the sliding glass door channels and around to the rig. In the case of the IC7300 and ID 4100, I had to come in through a jealousy window in a very small bedroom, and I was lucky that the screen cantilevered up just enough that I could get the PL259 connectors underneath it and into the room, and then push it back into place. You can see the screen is distended out just a little bit in the right-hand photograph, but it received the cables very nicely. You can see one of them running up the window washer pole at the very left of that picture that supports the X50 dual band antenna. This is a picture of the main station. To the upper right, you see the ID 4100 VHF-UHF station that is also capable of D-Star. I've got it set up ahead of time on area repeaters, including D-Star facilities. I've talked to Kirk W9WHF, his brother in Pennsylvania, and all kinds of stations around the world with it. We're fortunate to have 3 D-Star repeaters in the area, so I didn't have to bring a hotspot with me. It is here, but I didn't need it. And as I said, the real important thing for a VHF-UHF station is to pre-program your memories It's very easy to look them up, and you can have them all set to go the minute you screw the power lines and antennas into the rear. Next to it is the MFJ IntelliTuner. That's a model 929. I've had it for about 10 years and it's really worked well for me. Below that is the IC7300, probably the most popular radio on the globe right now. Just unbelievably happy with it. It's survived many trips to Florida and back. It just sits powered up in my station without being used almost all year, ready to come back down to Florida. The only reason I do that is you got to keep the clock battery powered in order to keep it from corroding and failing. Right next to that is a jet stream power supply. Both radios are hooked up to that. And it's also had about 10 or 12 years service without the least kind of a failure. This is a picture of both QRP stations. I'd like to talk first about the one on the left, which is the new IC705. Really happy with it. It's kind of a portable IC7300. Got most of the features except an antenna tuner, which is a real drawback. Fortunately, LDG company has made a companion tuner for it that you see on the lower right of that picture, which works flawlessly with it. You just go to the tune button, which is a soft button on the screen of the IC705, press tune, and it tunes up all by itself. Right immediately above it is a little amplifier that I found on eBay. It runs about 40 watts out. The only reason it's here is occasionally I get a really weak DX station, and I have to switch it into place in order for them to hear me. But other than that, we run 5 watts QRP. Above that is an SWR bridge. That's kind of important because you've got less than ideal antenna connections here and the issue of corrosion. And you want to be pretty cognizant of what your SWR conditions are. On the right panel is an FT818, which is a 5 watt QRP rig, also the companion power amplifier, which again almost rarely gets used. On its right side is a roughly $200 that I threw away. The thing does not work like it's supposed to. The only thing it provides is the upper third of the screen, which tells you the mode and the frequency that you're operating. And there's an S meter that has so much lag that is virtually unusable. For those of you who have the 817, 818 radios, you'll notice that little kickstand underneath it. I found that on eBay as well, and it is just amazing. It costs about $6, and it puts the rig in a very nice position to be viewed. Had I had that ahead of time, I would have not purchased that display. The reason that there are 2 QRP stations is that I wanted to try out and compare the 2 stations. Both of them are relatively new. I've had an FT817 probably 3 times now, and because of the small display, I just got discouraged with them. As far as the IC705, I've only had it about 3 weeks, and I really wanted to try it out in this situation. Generally, I keep the FT818 on scanning the local repeaters. I occasionally switch it over to sideband and try and make contacts with it. It works quite well. And with this new kickstand, the viewability is so much better that it's worked out to be a decent rig. The reason I actually have it is I want an ultra portable rig. Turns out that the IC705 on the left panel is rather bulky and heavy. When I took it out of the box, I was kind of surprised at how heavy it was. And keep in mind, it does have a battery attached on the back. So you have quite a few connections in order to give it all of its capabilities. I think those will improve. I think we'll see an IC 709 that will have a built-in tuner in it. But for now, there's a lot of accoutrements that are necessary to attach it. Whereas the FT 818, you can just throw that strap over your shoulder and screw on an antenna. It does have its own internal batteries, and you can walk around with it. So far, I haven't attempted that, even though I do have an appropriate HF antenna for it. That will come a little bit later. As far as locating these, this facility really had very little in the way of tables and things that you could put rigs on. So I pushed two end tables together. They're quite low, so you have to stoop down a little bit and slide way down in the couch that's right behind it from the camera side view. But we managed, as you can see, and it gave us a great opportunity to compare these two rigs. This is probably the most unusual thing I've done as far as antennas go. Some of you have been to my house and might argue that, but this is my little tree branch looping tactic. The problem was that based on previous attempts to get wires up on the air at other locations, we did try a ladder. I'll just leave it that it didn't turn out very well, and my wife banned me from using ladders. So I had to come up with some means of getting the wire antenna up in the air other than getting on a ladder and just throwing it over the tree branch. So what I did was took an old marine fire extinguisher that I owned, hooked a paracord rope to it, as you can see on the left photograph, and used that as my means of a pull rope to get over a palm tree branch. What I do is I screw that little fitting that you see enlarged in the center of the two photographs and loop it through that coupling, which I made myself. It turns out that the coupling has threads on the bottom and no threads on the top. You can buy these at Home Depot for about 79 cents. The reason for doing that is that the threads are 3/4 national pipe thread, and they match perfectly with the threads that are on the window washer poles. So all you have to do is screw the window washer pole into the bottom of the threads on this coupling, and it provides a means of elevating the cord and the fire extinguisher up over the tree branch. So the tactic is to pull the paracord as tight as you can to the top of the coupling that's on the extension pole, hoist the window washer pole up into the air. The best way I've found to do that is to lock the base of the window washer pole on your shoe and then just step backwards and pull the whole assembly up as best you can. Now that fire extinguisher weighs about 4 pounds. So it's not the easiest thing at 18-foot elevation to keep from dangling around up in the air, but it's doable. You have to hold the paracord really tight, and it will pretty much stay where it's supposed to on the end of the coupling. You then lift the fire extinguisher up and over the palm tree branch and then let go. The fire extinguisher is heavy enough that it'll pull the paracord all the way through, and the fire extinguisher ends up at your feet on the ground. It's a good idea to kind of duck a little out of the way as it's coming down. Then you just collapse that pole. You now have got both ends of the paracord available. You hook the far end onto one end of the cord and walk it to the location that you're going to have the second telescoping pole, and then place that same window washer pole in whatever means you have at the far end. I've always used tie wraps to hold it in place. Loop the wire through that coupling while it's still in the down position, and then raise it up such that the wire is at the full height of the extension pole. So the coupling serves two purposes. One, to initially get the near end of the wire antenna up over the palm tree branch, and the other is to permanently hold it in place while you're doing portable ops. The next subject seems to be unrelated, but this is really important. You'll see two spade-type fuses. These are common automotive fuses. I had a number 8 high-strand count cable made for my IC 7300 and ID 4100 in order to make sure that I had no voltage loss when I connected those two radios up to the Jetstream power supply. The cable is actually designed for automotive installation, but it works out well for temporary installation as well. It turns out that the salt in the air is probably the most likely reason that these fuses fail. I've never had one blow so far, but if you look closely at the 4 spades that are in this picture, you'll see quite a bit of corrosion. That is due to 2 factors. The salt that's in the air has turned them black, and trying to clean them up with tuner spray and any kind of serrated device I could find to polish them has worn the initial plating off of them, as well as created little cuts in the metal of the spades that are sticking out of the fuse. What happens is, every year I come down, I notice almost immediately that I can only get about 60 watts out running FM on the IC 7300. I take these fuses out, polish them up, put them back in, and it goes to 108 watts out, like it should. When this oxidation occurs, the fuses actually get hot. The holders feel quite warm to the touch, and you know that the reason you're not getting enough power output is because the voltage is low. It turns out the IC 7300 also has the capability of demonstrating its input voltage, so there's really no secret about what's causing the problem. I found that there is a product, I've ordered some, but forgot to bring it with me, of course, which is a copper paste available from DX Engineering. I've used it quite a bit at home on fuse holders, but you paint the fuse contacts and the holder contacts with this pure copper paste, and it really works well to prevent this type of oxidation. Again, I attribute most of this to the salt that's in the air. That same salt has caused corrosion of the aluminum tubings on the extendable poles. When I retract them to come home, I'll have a ring of salt around the plastic locking mechanisms on them. And anything you touch down here, you can feel the salt. The sliding glass doors, almost anything, even including the masonry, has this sticky salt on it. So I thought I'd throw that comment in that it might be useful to you to check your fuses at home. If you feel like the rig's not performing as it should, I found my IC 7300 was only running about 30 watts. I pulled the glass fuses out of their holders, cleaned them all up, and put them back together, and it went right to 108 to 110 watts on FM. So it's really a good maintenance thing to keep in mind. Well, thank you for watching our presentation today. Again, my name is Garry Decker. My call is W9WHF. Oddly, my email address is slightly different than my current call. This is an old email address that I've kept forever. And I did get a vanity call with W9WHF changing from K9WHF. K9WHF is currently held by my son, who earned his license as well. So we've kept it all in the family. Please feel free to put forward any questions or comments for those of you who are live on the Zoom conference, or send me an email anytime. I'll either communicate in that means or be glad to call you back if you provide a phone number, and we can talk about anything related to this or other rig questions that you might have.